everyone. Welcome to the Microsoft Office 365 Security Summit. This event was organized by the hardworking folks at Redmond Magazine, who have brought together some of the best independent experts on today's topic. Many thanks to our sponsors, Metallic, Graphus, Ignite, Opti9, Druva, and Zoho, without whom this event would not be possible. And thanks to you for joining us. I'm John K. Waters, Editor-in-Chief of Application Development Trends, and I'll be your moderator for the first of 3 information-packed sessions. Before we get started, I need to go over a few housekeeping details. Each of today's sessions is being recorded for later access. Keep an eye out for an email with a link to that recording. It'll be coming your way within the next few days. Each of today's sessions will be followed by a 5 to 10 minute Q&A. You can type your questions into the Q&A box at any time. Please feel free to add your questions as they occur to you throughout the summit. We'll do our best to get to all of them. Our sponsors have provided some extra resources that can be found on the right-hand side of your screen. Please take a moment to check those out. And last but not least, at the end of the 3rd session, one lucky attendee will be receiving an Xbox Series S gaming console with a 3-month Xbox Game Pass gift card. But you must be present to win, so stick with us. And now let's get to our first session, Microsoft 365 Security, Top Installation, Configuration, and Management Mistakes and Gotchas. For this session, we've called on Nathan O'Brien, a Microsoft Certified Solutions Master in Messaging and a former Microsoft MVP for Office Servers and Services. As a consultant at Slalom, Mr. O'Brien has worked extensively with Office 365, Exchange, Azure, Active Directory, and other Microsoft technologies. He is a 5-time MVP, and he actively contributes to the Exchange and Office 365 communities by writing articles for a range of technology websites, not to mention his own must-read blog. You are in for a great session. Take it away, Nathan.
Thank you very much, John, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Glad you could all join me here this morning or afternoon or evening or whatever time it is where you are. We are going to talk a little bit about some Office 365 security features and tools that are available to you within your Office 365 tenants. This here is where we're going to talk about today. I have about 30, 35 minutes of me saying hopefully smart things about these services. So we're going to cover it at a relatively high level here. Not going to go super detailed, but if you do have any questions at any time during the presentation, do feel free to put them into the Q&A panel there that's at the bottom of your screen. And then John and I will go through those questions towards the end of this presentation, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. Anything that we can't get to, of course, we can address later offline. You saw my Twitter address on the slide before, where you can reach out to me if you have any specific questions that I can answer for you. I'm not that hard to get a hold of. I think you'll probably see my email address will pop up once or twice in this presentation. So again, if anybody has any questions, please put them into the Q&A panel there at your screen, or find a way to ask me after the presentation. Always happy to try and we're kind of switching around on the slides there. One second, we can go back to this one. Okay. Always happy to try to answer questions whenever I can. All right, so we're going to talk about Microsoft 365 Defender. Before we get too much into technical details, there's a couple of things that I want to cover here at the top just to make sure that there's no confusion. We're all on the same page. First of all is the question of licensing. I am not a licensing expert. I do not, I don't spend my days paying attention to Microsoft licensing. It is a very complicated and detailed sort of field. It's a whole different job role than what I do. So if we do have any licensing questions, pretty much my answer to those is going to be I'm not entirely sure. I will say that I put this presentation together using my own personal Office 365 tenant that I use. And all these features are available to me in that tenant. I have a Microsoft 365 E5 license, so pretty much top of the shelf, all tools and features available with that one single license. But these applications, tools, features that we're going to talk about can also be licensed differently, through either individually or different combination of license packs can get you to these features. I'm not going to address all of that, all the different ways to get to these applications, but it can be done. Next thing I wanted to talk about before we get too far into the technical details of these services is the names of these services. Of course, any of you that are familiar with Microsoft and Office 365, it is Microsoft's habit to rename all these services all the time, move them around between different portals. As I was going through and putting together this presentation, the Microsoft documentation does have, hasn't all been updated to reflect the most current names of all these services. So I believe these are the current and correct names of all these services, but if afterwards you go through the Microsoft documentation for these features, you may see older names like Advanced Threat Protection or different names, Office 365 kind of services in here. I believe the names for these services that I have are correct and up to date, but that's today and the last couple of weeks as I put this presentation together, with the caveat that things change pretty quickly in Office 365. Names, I hope, are accurate now, but the documentation doesn't always reflect what the names I have up here on the screen are. And the screenshots that I use for talking about these features later in the presentation are all taken within the last week or two in my own personal Office 365 tenant. As I was going through and setting this up, I did look for some Microsoft resources to show kind of these features with more populated tenants that have more users and more data in them. Unfortunately, a lot of the names and the interfaces that's still included in the Microsoft documentation are not up to date. So wanted to cover that at the top. I think that that's the disclaimers that we have to cover here on this slide. So today I'm going to talk about Microsoft 365 Defender, which is a package of these 4 applications, tools, services that are listed on the screen. Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Office 365, Defender for Identity, and Defender for Cloud Apps. As you can see at the end of each line, I put in parentheses kind of the focus of each of these tools. Defender for Endpoint focuses on device security. That's your laptop, your phone, your iPad, that sort of stuff. Defender for Office 365 is really about protecting email and files. Defender for Identity is about protecting your on-premises Active Directory domain controllers and the identities that are in there. As we'll get into, that also has a sense that it can be installed on ADFS servers. Excuse me. And then the final one of these tools that we're going to talk about is Defender for Cloud Apps, which focuses on protecting your data in the cloud applications, not only Office 365 applications, but other third-party applications. And we're going to talk about that a little bit as we get into it. The primary portal for at least the top 2 of these, Defender for Endpoint and Defender for Office 365, is security.microsoft.com. I'm going to show you a few screenshots of what that looks like in my tenant within the last couple of weeks. Defender for Identity doesn't really have its own separate portal, and we're going to talk about how that works and where it feeds its data into as we get to that. And then Defender for Cloud Apps still has a separate portal that is not security.microsoft.com. We're going to show you that as we get to it too. Again, any of that stuff may change in the future. These portals are likely to look different and continue to evolve. That's just kind of the nature of working in this Office 365 environment. We all have to be aware that things, are constantly being updated by Microsoft, and the interfaces, the names of these things are evolving. So accuracy of this information will definitely drift over time. If you're listening to a recording sometime after I've done this live, then some of this may not be accurate anymore. All right, so let's get into talking about these applications. First thing we want to talk about is Defender for Endpoint. So Microsoft 365 Defender for Endpoint is a service that's focused on protecting your devices, ensuring that your laptops and your phones are secure and well protected against threats. Defender for Endpoint does not include a traditional kind of antivirus engine that you would install on your laptops or your workstations. That is not part of the suite, and I think that's kind of the first sort of point of confusion when I'm talking to customers about this service. They expect it to be, like a antivirus endpoint that you would install on your Windows workstations. It actually does not include that. Defender for Endpoint does use the natively built-in antivirus solution that is built into Windows 10 and to Windows 11. So that's kind of how it does that protection. There's no separate antivirus program to install. If you do install a third-party antivirus program on your Windows 10 or 11 machines, that can disable the built-in internal antivirus solution that's included in Windows 10 and Windows 11. So that may have effects on the features and functionality that you get out of Defender for Endpoint. It's important to remember. Defender for Endpoint is about attack surface reduction, threat and vulnerability management, and then automated investigation and remediation tools that your administrators in your Office 365 tenant can use after the fact of a breach to help remediate those problems. Focuses a lot on kind of security operations dashboard to monitor and address suspected malicious activity. It surfaces advanced hunting queries, which I don't believe we're going to have time to get into today, but there are demonstrations that are available from Microsoft with kind of older interface. They kind of walk you through how the hunting queries work. It does require a lot of programming kind of information and knowledge that's a little bit more advanced than we're going to have time to get into today with the about 35 minutes or so I have to speak. And Defender for Endpoint does tightly integrate with Endpoint Manager, formerly called Intune, so that we can use Intune to actually set up and deploy Defender for Endpoint Management on your devices, and we'll kind of speak to that a little bit here shortly. As I said, Defender for Endpoint does not include an antivirus client installed on machines. It relies on the Windows 10 built-in antivirus client that's already there. Defender devices are onboarded into Defender for Endpoint via a script. That script can be deployed various different ways as you go through the portal and try and inventory devices into Defender for Endpoint. There's kind of a drop-down option menu that allows you to just run a script on that machine. If you happen to be standing in front of that machine, you can push the script out via group policy objects, PowerShell scripts, and again, you can onboard devices into Defender for Endpoint via Intune, assuming you have the licensing for that and they're using that as well. Once devices are onboarded into Defender for Endpoint, there is a feature that will allow an onboarded device to do scans on your network looking for other devices that it may also extend the protection to. This mostly applies to like network devices, routers, switches, hubs, that sort of thing. There is a list of specific supported devices that can be scanned and recognized on your network from an onboarded workstation that's plugged into that network. You can see that information in the Microsoft documentation. And it does add security options and recommendations to the Defender portal, which we're going to show you a little bit here coming up in a second. This, again, is a screenshot from my personal Office 365 portal. Again, I'm really the only active user in that portal. In my own tenant, it's really just me. I use mostly for testing and validation. I use it for my own email and my own purposes on there as well. So a lot of the information that we're showing on here is kind of lightly populated. And obviously you can see my secure score for devices there on the right-hand side of the screen is a bit lower than I'd like it to be. I've actually been working and updating that, but we'll kind of show you how that process goes. But I think that's kind of the first thing that when I talk to customers about using Defender for Endpoint that I like to stress and really push them into kind of focusing on first is that secure score. I think that secure score is a very valuable tool that gives you a lot of information about how to update your devices, your configurations, that can really help make your organization much more secure. It's a great tool to use, and it kind of gamifies, I guess, gives you, small objectives, and we're going to show you how that all works here in a second. Small objectives, small things that you can update and ensure are secured in your environment. Of course, those recommendations are always being updated by Microsoft as new and different features are available in Office 365 or in Windows 10 or even iOS and things like that. It does give you a list of, hey, this is a feature that we feel you should turn on in your environment to help make your environment more secure. And that's really, I think, the biggest feature of the endpoint management that we're going to talk about here today and show you. Again, you can see my secure score for devices is at 49%. It gave me a bunch of recommendations. I inventoried a new kind of blank workstation into Defender for Endpoint at that time, and that's really where I got that score, and it showed me a bunch of things that I can update. I'm going to kind of walk you through some of the process that I use to start updating those features in Defender for Endpoint to ensure that my devices are more secure attached to my tenant. This next screenshot, as you can see there on the left, is the recommendations portal under the endpoint management feature. You can see as soon as it inventoried a device into Defender for Endpoint, there was a whole bunch of recommendations that were added to me for things that I can improve my security stance in my tenant and on my devices. What I did is I picked one of those, kind of put an arrow there, block untrusted and unassigned processes that run from a USB. So I thought that was an important one that I wanted to get updated. What this portal allows you to do, if you click into that, you can then open a ticket in the recommendation tab here that will then go to the remediation tab. So in a larger organization with a real IT security team, I would recommend, when I talk to customers, I recommend you have kind of your head of security who's responsible for going through these recommendations, kind of reviewing them, seeing how they will fit into your environment, how these changes will affect your devices, your users' productivity, the applications and things that they do. Strongly always recommend a good change management process. Don't just go and start turning on this stuff and locking down features. You can, of course, quickly cause yourself all kinds of problems doing that. But if you go through a good change management process, you would go through, look at these recommendations, pick one that you think is appropriate, and then if I were to click on that one, that USB one that I highlighted there, it opens a ticket and moves it to kind of the remediation tab here, where you can see this is that one that I picked out. I kind of opened a ticket for myself, for my own organization. I could assign this ticket to a specific tech that worked for me to go ahead and take care of this. Again, go through, follow your organization's change management procedures, but this page here does show you the remediation description and gives you good links to information where you can find out how to assign this security option in your environment. You can see it tells you could assign this via group policy or MDM, which it will give you instructions for how to do it via Intune. Of course, there are other third-party MDM solutions that would allow you to do this as well. And then this remediation ticket, you can then, the person who remediates that can mark in here, I remediated this problem via, whatever my methodology was, and you can put an explanation in there. So that everybody in your organization and your change management process is aware of the changes that you're making in your environment to help secure things so that you have a good process if there's any issues with any of those increased security causing problems for users or whatever. It's very important and a great feature of this Defender for Endpoint that I think we should all be paying more attention to. Running a little behind here, so I'll kind of move this a little more quickly. Defender for Office 365, kind of the second of this set of tools. This is where you're going to find your email security and kind of device, or I'm sorry, not device, OneDrive for Business, kind of files and security around that. This includes, policy configurations for any malware, any phishing, any spam. There's an email focus, but it also includes protection for OneDrive files. This is where you'll find features like safe links and safe attachments that allow for, detonation of email messages to see if an attachment is going to cause malicious activity in your environment. Safe links, which will, if somebody sends an email with a link in it to your company, that Microsoft takes that link, rewrites it to a Microsoft service where it is checked and verified that link isn't doing malicious activity. There isn't some script on that website that's going to cause problems. Includes the threat trackers and threat explorer reports. There is an attack simulator in here, which I'm going to highlight and show. Very useful tool that I highly recommend organizations implement and start using. And then again, it does enable those automated investigation and response capabilities via security playbooks. So this is a screenshot of the Threat Explorer under Email and Collaboration tab. There you can see on security.microsoft.com. This shows, some emails that I've recently received to my mailbox, and it kind of shows you where those emails are going and how the system is processing that. So this is where you want to go to kind of manage and look at the traffic coming into your environment, see where those emails are coming from, and seeing what the disposition of them. So, if Joe in accounting or whatever calls up and says, hey, I was expecting an email from Steve at that company that we're working with, never got to me, you can look and find that email here and see what happened to it. Did it go into quarantine? Did it go into his junk folder? Was it delivered to his inbox? That sort of information. Very handy and useful. A good centralized portal for kind of controlling that anti-spam and antivirus activity that's constantly going on in your Office 365 tenant. This is a good place to see and control where those emails are being disposed of, what they're happening, and why your users might be missing things. Another feature in the Office 365 Defender portal that I really encourage customers to be aware of and take use of is the attack simulation training. So there you can see on the left, I went to the attack simulation training tab, and then I launched a new simulation. So again, this is just me in my own tenant. I'm probably not going to surprise myself by phishing myself, but in a larger organization with hundreds or even thousands or huge bunches of users, it's vitally important that we train our users how to protect themselves against these phishing attacks. So phishing your own users in your own organization can be very helpful in training them. Hey, we sent you this phishing email. You clicked on the link. You probably shouldn't have done that. So this is a great training tool that I highly recommend organizations use. When you click that launch a simulation, it brings up this wizard, which allows you to pick different techniques for phishing your users. It allows you to pick different users that you will be phishing yourself. It presents, it sends a phishing attempt to those users, and then it also records for you a report of what your users are doing with that email. When your users see that, are they actually falling for it? Are they clicking on the links? Do they need more training? This tool does also include some training information that can then be sent to the users who fall for your, simulated phishing attempt. But it's vitally important that we keep our users aware of the risks from phishing attempts and make sure that they know how to deal with these emails. This next screenshot here is a screenshot of a phishing generated attack simulation training that I sent to myself. You can see I selected your account has been locked by Capital One sort of email here. You can see that it doesn't come from the actual Capital One email domain, but it's capital and the number 1, which is not the correct domain. There's some other clues through this email that users should be recognizing that this is a phishing email. So it's a great training tool. I highly recommend organizations implement and use this feature as much as possible. Keep yourself secure. All right, short on time, so we're going to move on here a little bit, talk about Defender for Identity. Defender for Identity includes a sensor that you install on your on-premises domain controllers and or ADFS servers. It then reads information from those servers, uploads it to the cloud, and uses machine learning to help you recognize threats that are present in your environment. It can classify the suspected malicious activity into alerts for rapid resolution via predetermined plans of action. Help you keep your environment secure. Defender for Identity does support Windows Server 2008 R2 SP1 and above. These are kind of the requirements of it. The system requirements that you need on those domain controllers or ADFS servers to support the Defender for Identity sensor. And then that last line there is kind of the events in the event logs of those servers that it's looking for. And then those are kind of the high priority ones that it uploads into Office 365, and it can generate warnings for you if these incidents are appearing on your servers. Uses various different data sources, network traffic analytics. Boy, not a great speaking day for me. NTLM, Kerberos, LDAP, RPC, DNS, SMB. It's monitoring all these different communications going on through the domain controllers, ADFS servers, and your network, looking for security events. Microsoft does program this, so if they find, a new vulnerability in the wild, they can update Defender for Identity very easily to recognize the kind of footprint of different attacks, help you profile users' behavior, so that if users start, doing something differently at any point, that might be an indicator that that account has been compromised. And it does use cloud-based real-time detections to analyze that data and ensure that your organization is being secured as well as it can be. All right, then coming up to kind of the last of these 4 services that I wanted to talk about. Just got a few minutes left here before we get to your questions. Again, if anybody does have any questions of anything that I've spoken about here this morning, please feel free to put them into the portal. Coming up in about 10 minutes or so here, John and I will try to address as many of those questions as we can before we wrap up, give you a little bit of time before the next session. Go ahead and give us those questions. All right. Defender for Cloud Apps, again, another service that was recently renamed. I believe it was called Cloud App Security until very recently. It's now called Defender for Cloud Apps. Documentation, the name can be a little bit confusing there as you go through the Microsoft documentation. I'm sure they'll get that updated relatively soon. Defender for Cloud Apps is a cloud application security broker. What it does is it enables kind of gatekeeper enforcement for your security policy for cloud-based applications. That is both Microsoft cloud-based applications and a large database of third-party cloud-based applications. So Defender for Cloud Apps can help your organization secure cloud applications that are not Microsoft applications. Things like Box, or Nets, a bunch of different cloud applications. I don't want to go through and list too many of them, but kind of helps your organization control those cloud applications. Can be very helpful in identifying shadow IT. Shadow IT is kind of when users aren't able to solve a problem that they have in their day-to-day working life with the tools that are provided by an organization or that are secured and watched by the organization. Sometimes users have a habit of using other, bringing their own third-party applications in and storing your organization's data in those. That can be potentially dangerous. Again, I mentioned Box. So if your organization doesn't use Box, but Defender for Cloud App is set up and monitoring in your organization, it will tell you things like, hey, your users are starting to use Box. They're uploading data into Box. Is this what you want to do? Is this what you want to allow? So this can help recognize those sort of threats and figure out the best ways for you to remediate those. If your users are, a lot of them are taking to new applications because they need them to complete their job, maybe it's best that you go to your management and say, hey, our users clearly are using this application or that application to store our data. Maybe we should find another alternative for them, find a way to control this data better, or we should bring in this specific application into our management so that we are managing that data and using it properly and ensuring that all our compliance needs and security needs are met via these applications. It also does facilitate conditional access controls that we can use with third-party applications. So conditional access is a feature within Azure Active Directory that you can set up and use to kind of control the authentication flow into different applications. So maybe you don't want users to log into your email from their own personal workstations. You can, set up conditional access so that they have to log into a laptop that is managed by your Intune, your own company's management. Various uses for that conditional access, and we can apply those conditional access filters through Defender for Cloud Apps to non-Microsoft apps as well. So depending on the application and how it works, those may have different features and functionality with third-party applications, but there's really some very useful stuff for that. The portal for Defender for Cloud Apps is portal.cloudappsecurity.com. I'm going to show a couple of screenshots from that here in a few minutes, kind of give you an idea how it works. Again, Defender for Cloud Apps is a cloud application security broker. That's kind of the class of service that it is. It works on log collection, API connector, and it works as a reverse proxy. So for log collection, Defender for Cloud Apps can collect logs both from your network devices in your organization, maybe your edge router. It can look and see kind of what third-party applications or even Microsoft applications your users are connecting to from within your network, and it can give you information about the applications that are being used in your network. And then the API connector functionality for applications that Microsoft is aware of and have inventoried into the system. Some of those applications do have APIs open that Microsoft can use to then connect to those applications and get you more information about how your users are using them. Of course, that functionality does vary by, the third-party application. There isn't one set of how it all works, but Microsoft tries very hard to use the APIs that are provided by these applications and integrate them into Cloud App Security to allow you better security control over how your data is used in the cloud. And then reverse proxy, Cloud App Security can be set up to work as a reverse proxy. Hopefully we all know what that is, but it's a device that you would connect to on the internet first before going out to these other applications, and allows you to have some control over what these applications are doing, how users are connecting to them, how they're authenticating to them, and ensuring that they're secure. All that great security functionality. Defender for Cloud Apps does include a database, Microsoft says, of about 16,000 applications, obviously not all Microsoft applications, that you can use to assign security. I'll show you here in a minute, I'll show you where you can look at the inventory of applications that show up on devices and mark them as, this is an application that we're aware of and we support. Maybe this one isn't, something we have to do about that. So we can help better control what applications users are using. Data protection provides insights into how your organization's data is being used. Not to pick on Box, but I mentioned them earlier. If users are uploading, say you have one user that's uploading 5 gigs of data from your pending sales folder into a Box account, your organization doesn't use Box. That might be a good indication that person is trying to take some data that belongs to your organization and get it out of the company. Maybe that's somebody who's looking for another position, something that needs to be taken care of, or maybe that's a user that has become infected with some kind of virus on their machine, and that virus is mining through data on their machine and uploading it out of your control into another service. So Defender for Cloud Apps can be very helpful in managing your data and where that data is going into different cloud applications. It, of course, involves some AI threat protection that can, again, detect changes in user behavior that may indicate a breach or ransomware or compromised account, this sort of stuff. Gives you great information on that. And then Microsoft does have their own kind of compliance ranking of these applications to tell you, hey, this is an application that we found that maybe we don't think is updated very well or isn't very secure or has vulnerabilities. Maybe you should consider blocking this application in your environment. Again, there's probably some room for some Microsoft bias in that, but I think for the most part they're very fair in evaluating these, and they give good reasons why they think specific applications should or should not be used, kind of the dangers of them, and it can show you kind of breaches and threat vulnerabilities that have to do with specific applications being used in environments. All right, this is a screenshot from Cloud App Discovery, again, in my own personal Office 365 tenant, so this is really only one machine that was inventoried, and it didn't have a whole lot installed on it. But you can see, I think I did this the day after I inventoried this machine in there. I discovered 18 apps on there, and it kind of looked at how much traffic was going between these apps. It gives us the information about what apps are being used, how they're being used, and what data is going to those apps. This next screenshot here, again, you can see discovered apps. This laptop just had, Windows 10 on it, probably basic Microsoft applications installed on it, but Cloud App Discovery did discover these applications, and you can see, I had traffic to Teams and MSN or whatever, the different applications that were installed on this machine, kind of what data is going through them, how much is being moved through these applications. And then there on the far right-hand side, you can see kind of that actions list. I can mark specific applications as allowed within my organization or disallowed, so that everybody's aware that, excuse me, so that everybody's aware that, hey, maybe this is a specific application we found that our users are using, and we want to kind of control the data used in those applications better, and make sure that everybody's keeping our data and our organization, our devices, safe and secure. All right, so we are right about at the 40 minutes into this, so we're going to leave about 15 minutes here for questions and answers. So again, have any questions, please put those into the portal, and then John will go ahead and read off the questions, and we will do our best to answer them. John.
Thanks, Nathan. There's a bunch. We got quite a few here. Let's see. I'm not even sure which one to. Let's just take it from the top here. This is from Glenn. He's wondering, does Defender for Cloud Apps block uploading of files to file storage apps until the action is approved, or does it just report after the fact?
Yeah, so the answer to that question is it depends on how you configure it. It is capable of doing either. So within my Office 365 tenant, I went through and set up a rule for OneDrive. I set up a rule that notified me of mass downloads of OneDrive files. If I downloaded more than, I don't remember what I set it to, 1 gigabyte or 5 gigabytes of OneDrive files at a time, it would set up an alert for that. I set that up, tested it, I got the alert, obviously just for myself. It can also, for some applications, provide kind of that blocking feature, but that really depends on the application and the API connectivity that Microsoft has into that application. So it does work better for first-party apps like OneDrive for Business. You are going to have better control over that than maybe Box or some other kind of storage application like that. The features and functionality do depend on the specific application Microsoft API access into that application. So you will see those features and functionality will vary.
Awesome. Okay, this one is from Jay. It's kind of a long one. He's wondering if Windows Defender does not contain an AV engine but could be disabled if you do install an AV, wouldn't it be wiser to install a full-featured EDR to allow you to have both?
Right. So Windows Defender for Endpoint itself does not contain an AV engine that is installed on your workstations. That part is correct. There is a built-in antivirus engine in Windows 10, and that's the kind of antivirus engine that Windows Defender for Endpoint does use on Windows 10 devices. So it's not part of Windows Defender, it's part of Windows itself. It can use that. Would it be better or wiser to use, a different third-party antivirus engine? That's really up to you. Obviously, not only Microsoft, but there are other companies that do, antivirus engines, and yes, maybe Symantec's, antivirus engine is better than the one in Windows 10. I'm not really here to evaluate that or to judge that, but there may be cases when you want to use a third-party antivirus engine and not the one that's built into Windows. That's really a choice for you and your organization. Please evaluate these solutions and see what works best for you, would be my recommendation.
Okay. Here's another kind of long one. Daniel is wondering, we have Microsoft Business Basic and Standard licenses, and that seems to drastically limit the features we have access to. Can we still achieve best security practices without a majority of the compliance/security centers and Azure?
All right, a licensing question, and I knew we'd get those. So again, I am not a licensing expert. I do not spend my time looking at the different licensing. I know there are different levels of Office 365 tenants. For instance, this listener talks about, business basic and standard licenses. There are enterprise licenses, there are business basic, there are government licenses, and that all kind of affects the build of the tenant itself and what features and functionality are available there. And then within each of those, there are different specific licenses that you can apply to get different features and functionality. And then, there's also different versions of Office 365 out there. Of course, there's the standard Office 365 that we have here in the United States, but there are two other separate versions of Office 365. The Gallatin version, which is in China, and then the Black Forest version, which is in Germany. So I guess the answer to this question is I don't have really good answers to licensing questions. I do know that Microsoft Business Basic tenants may not have full access to all of these features and functionalities that are available in the normal or in the standard enterprise Office 365 tenants. Things like the government editions, GCC and GCC High, also have different features and functionality. Everything I did here for this was an enterprise Office 365 tenant with a Microsoft 365 E5 license. So kind of top of the line, all the features and functionality available, but different Office 365 situations will have different features and functionalities available. And really my best advice is if you have licensing questions, find a Microsoft partner who does the licensing reselling and go to them. Things like an enterprise agreement or how you buy Office 365 can have an impact on this sort of stuff too. I just don't have good licensing answers.
Okay. This is from Adam. He's wondering, are Defender for Endpoint recommendation responses, or policy changes for that matter, logged in the unified audit log?
Yes. So the short answer to that is policy changes, configuration changes to Defender 365 portals, tools, configurations are all logged in the unified audit log, and there are like Graph API or PowerShell ways that you can pull that information out in different formats, or you can get to some of that. Getting some feedback there.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I think we took care of that.
Yep, sounds good.
There are that logging is done to the unified audit log. You can get some of that through the very security.microsoft.com portal or the Cloud App portal. It is also that information is available via Graph API and some PowerShell. There's ability to get that reporting out. Yes.
Okay, thanks. Eric is wondering, does Microsoft 365 have any DLP options built in, or do I need a third-party tool?
So yes, that's not really the focus of this specific webcast, but there are DLP features available in Microsoft 365. Those would be in the compliance portal, which is currently compliance.microsoft.com, not security.microsoft.com. But there is DLP functionality that is available in Office 365 through that portal based on your licensing. The DLP functionality in Office 365 I find to be pretty good. There's a bunch of preset kind of DLP rules in there. Where it gets hard, though, is if you're looking to protect parts of data or pieces of data that aren't already pre-built queries, then you have to be really good at regex programming to identify those data types. I don't want to go too much into it, but it can be kind of a complex process if you're trying to identify custom pieces of data, your company's product numbers or things like social security numbers are pretty easy because that's a very standard formatted data that's easy to recognize. There's pre-built-in rules for that. Kind of custom data can be a little bit more difficult. Credit card numbers are easy, but I've had customers ask for things in DLP like addresses, for instance. How do we recognize if somebody sends out an email that includes a bunch of customer addresses? And the answer to that is addresses are very hard to program and recognize in DLP engines because an address doesn't always look the same. The number could be first, the street number could be first, the street name could be first. There could be a north or a west kind of in there. It's not at regular places. So DLP, Microsoft does include DLP functionality within Office 365. It's pretty good, but it can be hard to program. So there are certainly cases where users do go to third-party DLP solutions that have better pre-programmed kind of DLP rules that are already set up for your organization if you're not able to program those yourself and get that working well.
Okay, thank you. Here's one coming in from Ellery. How does the attack simulator compare to a solution such as KnowBe4?
I would say it's very comparable. KnowBe4 is a solution that I'm familiar with. It does have a good attack simulator. I think probably KnowBe4, where it really shines and comes ahead of Microsoft is kind of in the training information that KnowBe4 can provide to users when they do make a mistake on these simulated attacks. I think probably KnowBe4 has better training for those users available to you, whereas Microsoft, the training is maybe not as good as that. Microsoft doesn't put as much effort into making sure that training part of it is as good. But kind of the flip side to that is you already have Office 365 that you're paying for. If you have these licenses and have these features, this is an attack simulator that may already be included in your licensing, and you don't have to go to that third party and pay somebody else for it. So I think the Microsoft Attack Simulator is very good. I think it's very useful If you have it, you should absolutely be using it. But there are cases where third-party applications may better fit your organization, depending on what your organization is looking for.
Okay, here's one from Mario. What feature in Defender can you use to block use of USB or USB stick on endpoint devices? Right.
So that is, as I showed a few slides kind of in the middle there, it is Defender for Endpoint. And then when you inventory just one device into Defender for Endpoint, it will start showing you security recommendations to secure that device, as I showed. So that kind of USB example that I showed from my tenant was just one brand new device. I inventoried it in there. And then the Secure Score tool started showing recommendations for how to secure that device. The more devices that you inventory in there, the more users that you have using them, the more data that's going through there, Microsoft may be able to provide better recommendations for you. But you get a good start with just one device inventoried into Defender for Endpoint. It gives you a lot of suggestions that my Secure Score wasn't showing the kind of endpoint configuration suggestions until I inventoried a device into Defender for Endpoint. And then it started showing a bunch of endpoint configuration security devices. So even just inventorying one device into Defender for Endpoint can give you more information to help you secure your environment.
Fascinating. Okay, Robert is wondering, does it matter where the apps are running in the cloud?
Does it matter where the apps are running in the cloud? Short answer is no. Really, the way that Defender for Cloud Apps is set up, if you have it fully set up, if you have it reading information from your routers, it can look at things like your router logs so that anytime anybody on your network is using any sort of internet app, it may be able to recognize that. Again, it has that database of about 16,000 apps currently that Microsoft is aware of that's using that cloud app security. So you're going to get better information for those 16,000 apps than if somebody invents a new app tomorrow called, Zingo or whatever. That new app that Microsoft isn't aware of, you may not get the same information from it, but Defender for Cloud Apps can read the logs from specific network devices to at least give you some information about it. So it doesn't matter where the apps are, but it does matter if Microsoft has seen that app before, is aware of the app, has inventoried it into their database, and Microsoft will have more information about it then.
Gotcha. Okay. This one is from Jason. Did you find you were able to get rid of existing products based on what you could do with Defender?
So with Defender itself, no, is the short answer to that question. So Defender for Endpoint Manager, as I showed you a little earlier, it can inventory the applications that are installed on specific workstations and tell you what users are using. Defender for Endpoint itself wouldn't block or uninstall any of those applications. But if you are using it in concert with Intune or other third-party MDM solutions, then is where you would get that functionality of either blocking or removing applications that are not authorized by your organization.
Okay. Let's see. What about this one? This is from Eric. He's sorry, not that one. Sorry, Eric. This one is from Phil. Is this all available in the GCC High platform?
The general answer to that that I will give is GCC High tends to lag behind the standard functionality of Office 365 Enterprise tenants. There is a more detailed process that Microsoft goes through with the U.S. government before features and functionality are introduced into GCC High. So GCC high tenants tend to lag a bit behind your enterprise tenants for the features and functionality. As you know, the stuff that I showed you today from my Office 365 tenant hasn't even caught up to the regular documentation for Microsoft 365 enterprise tenants. I would guess these features are not fully available in GCC high tenants yet, as I've shown them there today. So those lag behind. These are probably not available in GCC high tenants today, but I don't have a GCC high tenant because, I'm not a government. You can't just sign up for a GCC high tenant. You actually have to verify that you are a government agency. I don't have a tenant for testing, so I can't give a specific answer to that, but it will say that GCC high tenants do lag behind, so this is probably not all available in a GCC high tenant yet.
Okay. Man, but the time just went by so fast, Nathan. Looks like that's all the questions we have time for. Thank you so much for a great session.
Thank you very much, John.
All right, folks, I want to thank our guest expert, Nathan O'Brien, for a great session, and our sponsors, Metallic, Graphis, Ignite, Opti9, Druva, and Zoho, for making it possible. We're going to take a short break and be back around the top of the hour for our second session, Top 10 Microsoft 365 Security Best Practices Every Organization Must Implement, presented by Ben Stejink, owner of and Chief Cloud Consultant at Intelligent, and moderated by my colleague, David Rammel, the tech news veteran behind the editorial excellence at Virtualization and Cloud Review. Now would be a good time to check out the resources on your console provided by our sponsors. And remember, during the third session, we will be giving away an Xbox Series S gaming console with a 3-month Xbox Game Pass gift card. So stay tuned. Back in a few.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for being here. And, of course, thanks to our sponsors, Metallic, Graphis, Ignite, Opti9, Druva, and Zoho, for underwriting this summit and allowing us to bring you this great content. I'm David Rammel, editor of Virtualization and Cloud Review, here to moderate the second session on the top 10 Microsoft 365 security best practices every organization must implement. Our speaker for this session is Ben Stejink, owner and Chief Cloud Consultant at Intelligent, where he focuses on what's called the Microsoft Intelligent Cloud, Microsoft 365 and Azure. He has more than 15 years of experience with SharePoint, 9+ years of experience with Microsoft 365, and is a Microsoft certified trainer. Ben also co-hosts the MS Cloud IT Pro podcast, where he discusses the latest technologies in the Microsoft 365 and Azure space from an IT Pro point of view. Ben, it's great to have you here. Please take it away.
All right. Thanks, David. Thanks for having me back for another one of these summits. So excited to talk all about security today. And we did. I went and pulled my top 10 Microsoft 365 security best practices for this that, in my opinion, everybody should go and implement. There could be more. There may be some that may apply to one organization more than another. But we're going to take a look at kind of some of the top 10 that I have pulled out. This is a list of everything we're going to talk to. It is a long list covering 10 features, 10 different best practices of some of these security options in Microsoft 365 is a lot. So we're not going to do any demos. I don't have any time to get into any of these in a really deep dive, but I'm going to talk about why I picked these, different features that are available within all of these, and why I think this is one of those security best practices, one of those security features that you should implement within your organization for your users to help protect Office 365, help protect your data, all of those. So these 10, multi-factor authentication, privileged identity management, passwordless identity protection. conditional access, unified audit log, logging, log analytics, Microsoft Defender for Cloud, DLP, endpoint management, insider risk management. These are not in any particular order. These were just kind of the 10 that, as I sat down and think about it, came into my head and I started jotting them down. The order that you may want to implement these are going to be specific to you, to your organization, maybe certain security risks, certain requirements that you have as an organization. So we're going to go ahead, dive into these, and start talking through this list of features. The first of these, multi-factor authentication. This is one people have probably heard about plenty of times. This is not unique to Microsoft 365, to Azure AD. This is becoming more and more critical, in my opinion, to implement in whatever cloud service you use. But when it comes to Microsoft 365 or Office 365, Microsoft actually recently came out and released a report that said MFA is only active, enabled within 22% of organizations in Office 365. This actually surprised me. I thought this number would be a lot higher. I'd actually hoped it would be a lot higher. Over the last year or so, I've been actually involved in a couple of security breaches where an attacker got into someone's Azure environment, somebody's Microsoft 365 environment, exfiltrated data, encrypted data. It came through credentials, credentials that were exposed, usernames, passwords. There wasn't MFA enabled. There weren't certain security measures put in place. Most of those attacks come from those compromised credentials. I read a few different reports. It's going to vary based on who's pulling the data, where the reports come from. Compromised credentials, from what I could determine, seem to be in that upper 70%, 80%-ish range. It's not often from a bug in the code or a flaw in your operating system, a flaw in Microsoft 365. It's because an attacker gets somebody's credentials. They have a weak password. They get that username and password. They use the same password across multiple services. It's exposed on one service, makes them to yours. By putting multi-factor authentication in place, you can minimize that. You can really narrow down that risk and those compromised credentials causing you problems. Because now if someone gets a username, if they get a password, they try to log in, if your users know, don't approve that request on your mobile device, in your Authenticator app. If you have it set up where a text message where they can't even accidentally bump like the approve button, and they actually have to type in a text message, if they get one and they're not trying to log in, they just ignore it. Those compromised credentials aren't going to result in a security breach. There's two different ways. Primarily, there's a third. User-based MFA is kind of going away. The two I'm going to call out security defaults. This is on now in new Microsoft 365 tenants. This includes MFA. It also does some other things like blocking legacy authentication. There's 2 or 3 other features that are a part of security default. So this is included by free. If you have Office 365, if you have Microsoft 365 security defaults, you can turn it on. If you're in an older tenant, if you're on a newer one, it's going to be on by default. That's going to force MFA, force your users to go in and register, use a device, use the Authenticator app. You can set it up to use USB keys. Lots of options with MFA. They're not all included in security defaults. The next one is going to be conditional access. This gives you the most amount of flexibility when it comes to MFA. This is an Azure AD premium feature. And as we go through these, I'm going to try to do a really good job at calling out which of these features are included in which license plans or which family of licenses. Conditional access gives you additional options for how you can do MFA. but it also lets you set conditions around when you want to do MFA. Do you want to make sure every single admin in your organization absolutely has to have MFA enabled? You can do that with conditional access. You can do conditional access based on certain risk factors. You can do it based on IP address, country that someone might be trying to log in from. You can go in and set different conditions around when MFA is required. This is my favorite one. There's a couple security features we're going to talk about that, to me, it makes Azure AD Premium worth the upcharge. If all you do is go get Azure AD Premium Plan 1, multi-factor authentication with conditional access being that other feature, to me, is a big deal. And we'll talk about conditional access here a little bit later. The next one, privileged identity management. This is a feature that is part of E5. But what privileged identity management does is you no longer have a normal account and an admin account, particularly people that have come from the on-premises world. You may have your normal account that you use for email, that you use for just doing your day-to-day work. And then when you actually have to do admin stuff, perform admin tasks, you go in and you log in with your admin account. What privileged identity management does is, one, it takes away that need to have two accounts. If you're licensing them, you don't have to license two accounts. License your one normal everyday account. Now, privileged identity management says account is not a persistent admin. 90% of the time, it's just going to be a normal account. You can do your email. You can log into Planner, SharePoint, whatever it is. You have normal rights. When you need to perform those admin activities, now instead of logging out, logging back in, and having to admin, Azure AD join device, privileged role admin, security admin, you can go in and set up multiple different admin roles for these users. So now when I need to go in and change a user account, access my SharePoint admin portal, just access the Microsoft 365 admin portal, I first have to log into privileged identity management, elevate my account to that particular admin role I need. If I want to, I can enforce entering a reason for why you need these admin rights, and then go ahead and activate it. It goes through that process of switching my account up to an admin level, and you can see that screenshot on the top right, the period for 8 hours. I'm going to be a global admin, do my admin stuff. After 8 hours, I get automatically demoted from an admin back to a normal account. You also can have the option to approve requests. So if you have multiple administrators and someone needs admin rights, force an approval. They elevate their admin rights, it goes to the other admins, and they actually have to go in and say, yep, I approve those admin rights, you can have admin rights, go do what you need to. Because of this elevation, forcing someone to type in a reason, now all of that admin elevation gets audited. So you can actually see, when did Ben go create or elevate himself to a global admin? When did Sue go make herself a global admin? You have that entire history of when users were admins, why they needed admin rights. Again, if those credentials get compromised, if there's some bot that gets those credentials and is automatically trying to do certain admin stuff, delete users, remove users, it's not going to have those rights by default. It's just going to show up or act like a normal user until those admin rights get elevated. This is another one. I love it. It is an E5 plan. This one is only required to be licensed for those admins going to be using privileged identity management. So a lot of companies are like, I got 2 E3 plans. I have one for my normal user, one for my end user. 1E5 is usually less than licensing 2 users. So this one, go get the license for your admins, upgrade them to that Azure AD Premium Plan 2, get the privileged identity management. This one you do not have to license for every user in your organization. Only these people that are going to use this feature. Next up, passwordless. This one kind of goes hand in hand with MFA. This is going in and removing the need for users to enter a password when they log into Microsoft 365. You can see in the images here, that top image, when I go to log into Microsoft 365 now, I click on my username. I type in my username, and it never prompts me for a password. I frankly don't even know what my Microsoft 365 password is. Instead, it says, open your Authenticator app and enter this number shown to sign in. So grab my phone, pop open the app, and you get that bottom screenshot there. Are you trying? Face ID on my phone. If you have fingerprint ID, you can do a fingerprint ID. Only then does it automatically log me in. So it is, it's one of those features Microsoft, it did hit GA. Microsoft rolled it out, not just for Office 365. They also have it for personal Microsoft accounts now, your at Outlook.com account or your at Hotmail.com account. They even took it further with those, and that you can go into a personal Microsoft account and actually delete your password from your account. So you don't have any password anymore. It's not to Office 365 yet. Maybe it'll come. I'm not really sure what the roadmap is there. But more and more you're seeing this. We talked about it already with MFA. Passwords lead to weaker security. And Microsoft and require those password resets. Not anymore. Don't require those password resets. Force users to make it complex. Set a 24 character, a 32 character. I think Office 365 even allows up to a 256 character password. Set a long, hard password. Turn on passwordless. Don't make your users reset their passwords. And have them use passwordless. It makes it so much easier from a password perspective. The only thing you do have to be aware of, at least with Microsoft 365, is there are still a few areas where passwords are required. It doesn't fully support MFA or passwordless yet. You can see it's kind of hidden behind the screenshot. If it's not working, if I don't have my phone, you can still use other ways to sign in. I'm on a Mac. Some of the remote desktop stuff, when I'm logging into like a Windows 365 machine on a Mac, I still need to use the password. On a password manager, so again, I don't know what it is, but that is something to be aware of when it comes to passwordless, is that every once in a while, you may still need a password, but 99% of the time, this is the way I log in, and gives you some nice security benefits. Continuing on, identity protection. This is another Azure AD Premium P2 license, but this is another one that can help identify when maybe somebody's credentials got compromised or when somebody is trying to get into your account. I actually see a question that I caught the header of it. Yes, the Microsoft Authenticator app is required for passwordless at this point in time. So that was just a quick one, caught up when we were talking about that. Back to identity protection. And I'm going to try to make some time and come back to a bunch of these other questions too later on. This helps identify some of those risky behaviors and automatically protect your account based on those risky users. Within identity protection, within Azure AD, you have risky users and risky sign-ins. Risky sign-ins is going to look at that sign-in activity and use some machine learning, use history, use certain rules, actually detect risky sign-ins. For instance, if I'm down in Florida, if I sign in Florida and I sign in over in Sri Lanka, I actually had a customer that had that, Pennsylvania, Sri Lanka, within 30 minutes of each other. Risky sign-ins is going to say, oh, wait a minute, you can't get from Pennsylvania to Sri Lanka in 30 minutes to sign in with the same account from both places. There's something going on here. I got an alert for that customer that said, hey, there was an impossible travel situation that happened, 2 logins within a certain amount of time, 2 different countries. You better go check this out. Come to find out, that particular user was working with somebody, was remoted into another computer in Sri Lanka, typed in his username and password over there, but it flagged it. And then once it flags it, you can also take actions. You can say, let's go enforce MFA. Maybe MFA isn't always on. Maybe you're in that boat. Maybe you want to say, as soon as you detect that risky sign-in, let's just block that user's login. We don't even want to risk it. Risky sign-ins can go in and perform those actions based on that risk detection level, and you can set the detection level, low, medium, or high, and take those actions based on that risky sign-in behavior. I threw a couple of other ones up there, devices, anonymous IP addresses. There's a set of conditions that Microsoft has determined that constitute risky sign-ins. The other one is risky users. So maybe you've already signed in. The sign-in was okay, but now that user is going in and performing certain actions that are deemed as risky. They're doing something that seems malicious, whether it's downloading a bunch of information, whether it's running certain scripts. This is when Microsoft doesn't publish a whole lot of documentation on the exact criteria that would trigger a risky user behavior, primarily because if you knew all the rules that went into place, it'd be a little bit easier to work around them. But that risky users is, I've already signed in, now I'm taking certain actions or doing certain things that are deemed risky. We're going to go in and, again, block that user. We're going to disable their account until somebody can go in, review what was going on with that account, and then re-enable it. And then finally, another one that they recently added that's still in preview, I haven't had a chance to play with it yet, is risky workload identities. Think of these as applications. You may have gone in and registered an application. For instance, I have like Calendly associated with my Office 365 account. I think some of the sponsors have some add-ins that you can register with Azure AD with your Office 365 account, and typically those are using service principals, registered applications, managed identities. Maybe you want to look for, we registered an application and it's doing something that is deemed risky or deemed malicious against our environment. That's acting as the application. It's not the user. It's that service principal, that managed identity, that app registration, acting against my environment that's doing something that it looks like it shouldn't be. You can actually use identity protection to go in and set certain flags and alerts now so you can get notified when those actions are occurring as a part of that application registered with your environment. So identity protection. I've lost track of what number I'm on. 1, 2, 3, 4, I think. Number 4 was identity protection. Conditional access. This is my other go get Azure AD Premium P1. This and then tying MFA in with this alone are enough for me personally to say, you know what, Azure AD Premium Plan 1 is worth it. You hear some arguments, and I'm hearing them less and less, but I still hear them, is my on-premises environment is more secure. It's not attached to the internet. People can't get to it from anywhere. They have to VPN in. They have to be in our office because I can't access it from any location I want to. Conditional access takes care of that. Conditional access first acts on signals. And it's going to say who can access which app, under what conditions, and what are you allowed to do. That signal is going to be a user, a location, an IP address. You can lock that down to your office. So people can only access Office 365, log into your Office 365 applications, or any third-party application registered with your Azure Active Directory where they're using those same credentials to log in. So they can only do that from your corporate IP address. It can be what application they're coming from. Am I using Outlook on my phone, or am I using the built-in mail app on my phone? Am I using the desktop application, or am I using the browser on my device? The signal can be the device itself. Is this device joined to Azure Active Directory, or is this device joined to my on-premises Active Directory even? Syncs up. I'm in that hybrid scenario. Is this device marked as compliant? Do I have things like hard drive encryption on? And do I have a password set to log into my device? What are those conditions on the device? That real-time risk status that we just talked about, risky sign-ins and risky users, can be one of those signals. So you get all of these different signals coming in about who a user is, what device they're logging in from, what location they're in. Mobile devices, you can actually use a GPS location, a latitude and longitude now, based on a mobile device. So obviously that one's not going to work as well for a computer if it can't, it doesn't have those GPS capabilities in. But phones, where is this phone physically located based on those GPS coordinates? It's going to take all of those different signals and now say, what are you allowed to do? Are you allowed to log into Office 365? Are you going to be outright denied access to Office 365? You're not coming from one of our devices that we've owned, that we've joined the Azure Active Directory, that we manage. You're not getting access to the environment because you might be logging in from a friend's computer or from a computer at the store or from another family member's computer that your company can't deem is secure because it doesn't fall in their device management policies. Or you could say we're going to require MFA. We don't recognize this device, or we're not quite sure who you are, where you're coming from. You're an administrator coming from a device that's not joined. We want to require MFA and make sure you're actually you logging in from this device. And then once you go through that, you can actually pick which apps and data are people allowed to access. Maybe people can get to email from anywhere, but they can only get to SharePoint to access files from within your company. Maybe some of your applications that you have registered, you have different conditions around when people can access those. You can set this at a broad of scope as Office 365 or at Azure, the Azure portal, administrator rights. You can set it really high, and you can get very granular, just apps. SharePoint is even starting to allow you to do some conditional access stuff to individual sites. So I can access one site from anywhere. I can access another site only when I'm on the corporate network. And you also have templates now. This is something that is really new. You used to have to go in and create all of these conditional access policies from scratch. Now you can go in and select templates. So they have some of those templates you can see down at the bottom image there. Identity-based templates, who you are, as well as device-based templates. What device are you coming from? So you don't have to go in and figure these out as well. You can go in and test them, requiring multi-factor authentication for Azure management, blocking that legacy authentication, requiring multi-factor authentication for all your users, going back to that first point. So go explore those templates. I would give you one word of caution. You can set up conditional access policies in a way where you can completely block yourself out of your own environment. So take care when you do these. I recommend you always have at least one account that you exclude from any new policy you create. Make sure you have an administrator. They're excluded from the policy so that when you turn it on, if you did happen to mess something up, you can still bypass that conditional access policy, log in as that admin, make the appropriate fixes. I have an admin account in my environment. It's a break glass account. It has a very long password. I think I'm up to 32 or 64 characters for the password. I actually used a password generator to generate the username. So the username itself is a string of random characters. I'm not going to use an admin at mycompany.com or administrator at mycompany.com. People can guess those. If this is going to be a break glass account, make it hard for people to figure it out, especially if you're going to have it excluded from some of these things in case of one of those emergencies. Next one, logging. There's a couple different flavors of logging when it comes to Office 365. This one varies by license. Basic logging you're going to get for every Office 365 environment. They say it's enabled by default, so it's supposed to be enabled by default. Make sure you go in and check. This is in the Compliance Center under auditing. I spun up an environment recently, went in, it wasn't turned on, I had to go in and enable it. This is going to give you all kinds of audited events across all of your Office 365 services, logins, file deletions, copying emails from one folder to another, deleting emails, Power BI reports. There are actions from just about every service, your DLP services that get captured in this audit log. So if you do have some type of scenario where you need to go in and look at who deleted a file, what happened, whose email box was sending out a bunch of emails, what time did this email box start sending out a bunch of emails. All of that's going to be in this unified audit log. If you need more, you can get to advanced audit. I think, I didn't write it on the slide, and I can't remember off the top of my head. I think the basic to advanced is an E5. Some of these, there's getting to be a few other SKUs that you can enable it with. But advanced auditing is going to give you longer retention, so you're going to jump from that 90-day default up to a 365 days. I know that aspect of it is an E5, which is what makes me think advanced audit was an E5 as well. You do get a few more events. You can see under advanced audit there, it's called out high value crucial events. So you do get access to a few more events that are monitored within that advanced audit log. Again, I am not necessarily saying you have to go to advanced audit. This is one of those up to your company, look at basic versus audit, benefits, in terms of retention, maybe some of those activities, but make sure the basic audit is at least turned on. Again, it's going to give you dates, times, it's going to give you the activities that were performed. It's going to give you the IP address that those activities were performed from, user accounts associated with them. I go into my audit log and I can see every time I opened a Word document, saved a Word document, copied a Word document, moved a Word document, forwarded an email, logged into Azure AD. there are a ton of events in there that are monitored. This is not something that I go in and look at on a regular basis, but when I need it, I'm glad it's on. There's a few different use cases. Again, a security breach where you need to go in and just look at a whole bunch of audits. A user you think was being nefarious, and you want to go see what activities they did. I've also used this for something as simple as a user contacted me and said, this document used to be in this location in SharePoint. It's not there anymore. What happened to it? I went in, I did a search for that file name, found the file. It turned out another user had inadvertently moved it to a different folder. So we were just able to go in and see, oh, the file just got moved. Here, the file's over here now. You can move it back. You can point them to where the file is. There's a lot of different use cases for it. Just be aware that it does audit everything. So you do want to take care in terms of who has access to it, because it does expose things like file names and subjects of emails and SharePoint sites and mailboxes, and some of that information that could be sensitive based on what people are able to infer from some of that metadata about the activities that it monitors. Next up, Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. Portal.cloudappsecurity.com. This is in, I put the E5 SKUs. There's a few different E5 SKUs that this is in. I think this also got included recently in Microsoft 365 Business Premium. This is another tool that allows you to go in and monitor a lot of that activity across your environment. This looks at a lot of that unified audit log, that logging we just talked about, actually gets pulled into Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps as well. You can see in here, it pulled in some of those risky events. This also does a good job at doing more of that flagging and alerting based on events that you may deem to be severe, medium severity. This one, I have a couple of those high ones. It was a failed user login attempt. A user tried to use one of the usernames in my environment to log into, in this case, it was email. It failed 10 times and immediately recognized it, sent me an alert and said, there's an attempted login. They failed 10 times. They're coming from this IP address. This is the username they're using. It sent me an alert. It also sends me alerts that you can see I have flagged as medium there. It's the third and fourth one down. Is stale externally shared files. I shared a file from SharePoint, shared it out with somebody. It's been sitting out there for half a year. It still is shared with that person. And it's saying, do you still want this shared with somebody? Maybe we should go in and remove those sharing permissions. So you can do that in Cloud App or Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. This also will watch activity that's going on with Dropbox, with Google Workspace, AWS, people copying files out there. You can use this along with DLP and actually watch for people copying content from their device that contains sensitive information and copying it out to one of those other services. So this kind of takes your Microsoft Cloud security, your events, some alerting, and expands it out to some of those other services as well. So that Microsoft Cloud Plus. This one, I just put a few screenshots in here. So this did some of that cloud discovery. You can see there's some traffic. It's watching traffic that's going out. You can see services that it's going out to. Azure CDN, Microsoft MSN, SharePoint, OneDrive. It's detected 38 different apps that I'm using across devices, one IP address, one user. It was me, one device. So this is all traffic related to me and my device that does have Microsoft Defender for Endpoint on it. I think this picked everything up from my Mac, too. I think the one device on here was from my Apple device. again, here is some of those recognized sites. Which ones are risky? Yammer, you can go in and actually approve or flag different applications as well. So it's picking up a bunch of stuff from Dropbox, but Dropbox is approved. You're saying, yeah, people are fine to use Dropbox. You can go through and check that application, say, this app is great, people are free to use it. Let's flag that particular application as no longer having that risk store because we have approved it, we've set it up. There's some other things too you can even start doing between Cloud App Security now and your conditional access policies. In terms of setting up certain policies in Cloud App Security, and if they violate policies in Cloud App Security, set certain rules in conditional access. This is one I haven't played with that particular feature a lot yet. I've started reading through the documentation and digging through it, but all of this, these products get more and more integrated together in terms of really being able to secure your environment by bringing all of these different things together. One thing I mentioned too with some of this logging is you start even pulling some of this now into like log analytics and Azure Sentinel. You just increase that ability to really increase your security, dive into those investigations, track exactly what happened with a particular user across all of these different logs as they're all brought together into something like log analytics and Cloud App Security. Keeping an eye on time, data loss prevention. I actually caught someone asking a question about this at the end of the last session about data loss prevention. Like we said, it's technically in the compliance center. Yeah, compliance is a big thing. HIPAA, PII. I think this is also a security feature. I don't want, from a security perspective, bank account information, PII getting out there. DLP in Office 365 actually has built-in policies now to watch for things like connection strings to Azure SQL databases. It has IP addresses as a sensitive information type that it can watch for. So even from that perspective, it starts to become a security thing. I don't want a connection string to one of my Azure SQL databases or a connection string to Azure Blob Storage going out over email or going out via a Teams chat, getting shared as part of a SharePoint file that's shared with external users. So data loss prevention in Office 365 is even expanding beyond some of those PII, HIPAA, bank account, financial type detections in looking for some of those IT-based information, developer-based information that could actually prevent a security breach. You can see here it does. It applies across Exchange, SharePoint, Teams, conversations in terms of chat, OneDrive. It ties into your Cloud App Security. On-premises file shares. You can do DLP for on-premises file shares, Power BI reports. And this applies now even to devices. You can go start setting up DLP policies that with Microsoft Defender for Endpoint installed on that endpoint will watch files on your devices, report back any files that have been detected on a device that contains sensitive information. And then you can set up restrictions like don't allow people to copy sensitive information from their device to a USB drive, or don't allow them to upload sensitive information to Dropbox. They can still use Dropbox. They can still use USB drives. They just can't put sensitive information on them. If you go get some of the E5 SKUs, you can auto-label content in SharePoint and Exchange, where it now scans, looks for sensitive information, and automatically labels it as sensitive. Just the normal DLP, detect it, block it from being shared, block an email, auto-encrypt it. You can get all of this with the E3 SKUs. Office 365 E3, Microsoft 365 E3. It's going to give you that built-in DLP. The devices, again, like Windows and Mac, when you get into that, you're going to have some of that other, like the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, Cloud App Security, you're going to have those E5. So you don't necessarily get all the integrations with E3, but you're going to get Exchange, SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive right out of the box with any of those E3 SKUs. Endpoint protection management. This is going to be that managing your endpoints, Android, iOS, Mac, Windows, those devices users are working on, making sure they're compliant in terms of hard drive encryption or in terms of passwords for their screensavers. You can do stuff with update management, making sure devices are getting their Windows update. Intune itself has been rolled into this whole Microsoft endpoint management suite in terms of managing all those different aspects of your devices. Web content filtering now is a part of endpoint management. You can go categorize which categories of websites do you want to block on your devices managed with endpoint management. Do you want to block gambling sites, entertainment sites, social media sites, and then even put in your own URLs. We need to block this specific URL with the web content filtering. This whole endpoint protection suite with the antivirus, the disk encryption, the firewalls, the web filtering, the application management, update management, that whole suite of products has really expanded over the last year in terms of the capabilities you get with that endpoint management, both from managing and securing your devices, as well as from reporting on those devices. So this endpoint management is another one of those that if you're not doing it already, if you don't have another solution, if you're looking to switch, go look at what Microsoft has done with endpoint management as a part of Microsoft 365. Again, the more you, some companies, I've heard organizations say, we don't want to be all in on Microsoft. And I get that to a certain extent. You want to have these different products. You like not necessarily being 100% dependent on Microsoft. But everything I've seen, as you bundle all of these things together, the integration, the communication that is enabled by doing everything on Microsoft, you're really able to lock down your environment. And there's a lot of benefits to having all of this bundled together in something like one of those E5 plans or even Microsoft 365 Business Premium. If you're under 300 users, it's gotten really good. Last but not least, insider risk management. This is another E5 SKU. This is similar to the risky behavior or the risky user, but this has its own amount of settings around auditing, alerting, watching for an employee that's in your company, they have an account, going in and doing what it says here, downloading a bunch of files, deleting a bunch of files, mass sharing files, forwarding a whole bunch of emails. Actions that a user may take if they're upset, if they're thinking about leaving, if they got let go and you did not lock down their account, lock down their device first, or if they are just, again, looking to expose company information. Maybe they're not even mad. They're just trying to leak data. Insider risk management will go in and help you monitor all of that. You can set up some of those priority assets. HR site, a site that contains a whole bunch of intellectual property. Maybe it's CAD drawings or design plans or roadmaps for your company or acquisitions you're about to make. You can go set priority assets and highlight those, elevate those even more in terms of if somebody goes and downloads a whole bunch of intellectual property, you want to flag it, you want to open a case, block them from doing certain things, send notifications. This is another one of those. I wasn't super familiar with this one up until maybe a couple months ago when they went in and played with us. but really powerful from protecting against those insider risks. So that was my whirlwind tour of my top things to go in and implement and look at. I've seen some more questions coming by. So, David, do we want to dive into some of those for a few minutes?
We'll dive right into them, and we'll take them in the order they were received. First question comes from Michael. If you have MFA enabled, do you feel like password changes should still be required every 90 days, like auditors expect? I feel like with MFA enabled, our passwords are really changing every 30 seconds.
Yes, I would tend to agree. I said that with passwordless of not changing passwords. I would say the same thing with MFA, is that I would still make sure they're secure. You still don't want somebody doing password 123. But if you enforce those complexity requirements and you have MFA enabled, it goes back a little bit to some of those NIST recommendations where I brought it up with passwordless, but it really applies to MFA as well. If you're doing MFA, if you're always requiring MFA every single time somebody logs in, I think changing passwords every 90 days, it leads to password weakness because people just change the last couple numbers. They change the symbol in it. They have words they rotate through. Password changes, they're seeing more and more now that we have MFA and passwordless. Password changes lead to weaker passwords.
Okay, and moving right along. Next question comes from Aaron. Do security defaults enforce MFA on service accounts as well? Is there an exception feature for those?
So I'm going to go with the traditional definition of a service account, and that it's just another account in Azure AD that you have created to do things like connect email, or you're using it to connect, essentially a username and password in Azure Active Directory to connect to another service. Security defaults in that case, yes. They are going to go in and enforce MFA across every user in your Office 365 environment, irrespective of what that user is set up as, because frankly, Azure AD doesn't really know. So you can't do like security defaults only for a certain group or for user accounts that have a certain name. It's going to be all or nothing. If you need to set up some of those exclusions, that's where you really are going to have to start looking at going to something like conditional access. So what Microsoft is going to start saying, you're starting to see it more as you integrate third-party products in, then it's looking at something like service principals and registering apps within your organization, and like setting up an Azure, an enterprise application or an application within Azure AD that's registered, and then it starts using like a client ID and secret, or you're using certificate-based authentication. Then your security defaults aren't going to enforce MFA on those service principals when you're doing that registered app type scenario.
Okay, next question comes from Daniel. Is it possible to license just our admin for Azure Premium and use its features on all of our basic E1 licenses?
Is it possible? Yes. Does it violate Microsoft's terms of service? Yes. So there's a few of them. You do have to go in and read the fine print. That's the broad sweeping answer. You get some of those things like privileged identity management. There was another one I was thinking of recently. Dynamic groups are another premium feature in Azure AD. Conditional access has been a little gray based on everything I've read in terms of Like, do you only need to license users that a conditional access policy applies to? So I am not going to speak authoritatively on conditional access. But I will say some of those features, they do specifically call out in the documentation, like privileged identity management, is you only need this license for this feature for these users. But by and large, you are supposed to license Azure AD for all of your users that are using that feature. Technically, one user licensed lights up a bunch of those. There's a whole document Microsoft has on those different entitlements and how they get lit up, but that you are still supposed to go in and license those for all users.
Okay. Nice try, Daniel. All right, next question comes from Chris. Can you schedule PIM to be only allowable during business hours, or do you have to set the parameters on a daily basis?
Oh, I'm trying to think. I have never tried to set it on like a recurring schedule where it would only be available during business hours. You can set it so that a user is only allowed to elevate themselves to one of those roles for a period of time. So like a contractor comes in, they're doing some work, they need admin access, turn on approval, and you say, this is good for 30 days. After 30 days, they're no longer eligible to elevate their role to that admin role. It just isn't an option. I don't think you can do it, though, based on they're only allowed to do privileged identity management from like 8 to 5, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. Well, looks like that's all the questions we have time for. So thanks again, Ben, for a great presentation and answering all those questions.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for having me again. Thank you all for showing up. Hope everybody has a great day. Feel free, search for Ben Stedgink, too. If you have any more questions, you want to follow up with me, I'm the only Ben Stedgink out there. I'm pretty easy to find on the internet if you go look for my name. So thanks again, everybody.